first of all, welcome again. Very excited to meet all of you. As Kristen mentioned, I am with Accenture, and many of you heard of Accenture. It's a very large company out there, and I lead our sustainability and strategy practice. And essentially for us, that means helping businesses do well and do good at the same time. So do well, make a profit, be a big business, grow and be competitive, while helping the planet, helping people, helping ecosystems and economies around the world. So first of all, what do we even mean by sustainability? It's one of those terms that are thrown out there and can mean a gazillion things to a bunch of different people. I know there's some feedback. That's a little bit better. But if you look at sustainability from a pure ecology perspective, it's basically the capacity to endure, right? It's how biological systems remain diverse and productive indefinitely. So when we look at that from a business perspective, we have to say, what does that mean, right? What do businesses actually need to endure, right? If you read all the recent headlines out there, similar to what we just heard around wildlife, the future may not seem that bright, right? There's a lot of kind of negative out there, kind of contrary to this Optimism summit. So if I look specifically at food and water, some of the statistics are pretty scary, right? 2.5 billion people today do not have access to adequate sanitation. Close to 800 million people lack access to clean drinking water. 5 billion people could be living in these water-stressed areas by 2050. And every year, somewhere between 6 and 8 million people die from disasters and the spread of water-related diseases. And that's just a few, right, on the water side. If I go and I start looking at food, in some ways it can even look more dire, right? We have close to 800 million people around the world today that are undernourished, and some estimates have that at over 1 billion. We have 3 billion people around the world depend on fish, but if you look at some of the latest research that's out, by 2048, every single species, those systems may collapse in the next several years. That's to me, frightening. 70% increased agricultural output is needed to feed the world by 2050, but if you look at our current systems, we can barely feed the people, as we mentioned, that we have today. And 1/3 of the food that is produced every year is wasted. And from a business perspective, that food wastage is costing those food producers about $750 billion per year. Right, so if I'm a business, I look at this and this is kind of alarming, right? This is pretty scary, a scary world to live in. But if I look at this from a sustainability perspective, businesses can also say, hey, how can I look at all these challenges and instead look at them as opportunities, right? Look at them as system failures where market-based solutions can help address both the problems, but also help my bottom line as a company. So what if instead I looked at a world that's a little bit more optimistic, a world where every dollar that I spend on water and sanitation increases about $4 in economics for that country or for that location. Companies last year alone lost $14 billion because of water scarcity and risks. So I could just bring an additional $14 billion back to my corporation purely by dealing with water scarcity. And I have just a couple of examples up there. So for example, Coca-Cola made a commitment several years ago to fully replenish all of its water usage, and they've overachieved that target both by several years, but also by about 15%, so 115% of the water they use is replenished. And then we're seeing other companies that are really trying to build this into their core systems, right, and in the core of what their business is. So Levi's is one example. One of their new jeans that they've put out there uses 96% less water than the typical Levi jeans. And there's a new company, a new startup out there that is looking at water-free ways to dye their jeans, which is, again, pretty impressive. So it's hard to talk about how amazing that particular technology is, but if that works, think about the huge implications of that, right? To be able to dye our clothes or to be able to produce things with zero water, that's huge. From a food perspective, we know that the market for different types of organic and sustainable products is booming, right? So $63 billion organic veggie and fruits market by 2020. We know that there's the current eco-labeled seafood market is close to $5 billion. We know that just purely having more sustainable fishery products or practices could add about $50 billion of profits to the industry. And up to 40% of food wastage can be reduced or avoided completely purely by fixing our distribution systems in developing countries, right? So no other change is needed, purely by fixing the way in which we distribute food. And the other reason I'm really optimistic is when we talk to leaders, this isn't just a pipe dream, right? We just did this survey that we do every 3 years with the UN Global Compact. And then this year's survey, the most optimistic probably of all surveys we've done with them in the last 12 years, we've heard that 90% of business leaders feel a personal responsibility to ensure that their company has a clear purpose and role in society. This number might sound very loose and happy out for you guys, but I can tell you in all of our survey results in the last several years prior to this, it was a much, much, much lower number. We specifically asked them about the Sustainable Development Goals, right? The UN goals towards a more prosperous, equitable, and thriving future by 2030. And 87% of those business leaders believe that those Sustainable Development Goals provide an opportunity to actually rethink their approaches to sustainable value creation. Almost 80% already see opportunities for their business to contribute to the goals, right, through their core business. And to me, probably the most surprising is this last one. About 50% of business leaders believe that business will be the single most important actor in developing or achieving the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. So not NGOs, not governments, not all these organizations that we assume should be the primary actor, but that business is actually the one that will be the most important actor to actually achieving those goals. So when you combine those things together, when you look at the business opportunity of food and water in the future, when you look at the change in direction of business leaders, both in terms of accountability, but also maybe more importantly in terms of their own personal motivations, I think it's a really encouraging view of the future. We just need to make sure it actually happens. And I'm hoping in our conversations today, we talk a little bit about those models that actually work, how we get to scale, right? And how we ensure that this is something that happens systemically across the world, not just piecemeal. And again, together, if I look back at that definition of sustainability, this is really the way in which we can both endure, both for our planet, but also for our businesses.